following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, thousands of seniors at risk. Home health care providers could close down or cut services, their backs against the wall as the state's funding runs dry.
No sunshine, no problem. One Chicago area company is taking indoor farming to a new level. How some tender loving care and a 90,000 square foot warehouse can help feed a city.
The city's homicide rate is finally going down. But that good news got lost when hundreds of teens caused mayhem on the Magnificent Mile. How can Chicago cope with kids out of control?
And expect to pay more in controversial new taxes. Cook County is taking aim at gun buyers and anyone who buys anything on the internet. Those stories and more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening, I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. Tonight we take an in-depth look at the state's budget crisis and the impact it's having on Illinois' most vulnerable residents.
80,000 seniors depend on in-home care, but the state program that funds those caregivers has run out of cash.
She's just like family. She do all my grocery shopping and everything. And that means so much to have somebody that can do these things for you.
Without that help, Jane McDonald, who turns 80 this week, knows she could never live on her own. Heart and back trouble confined her to a wheelchair. Health aide Wycilla Suttle is now her arms, her legs, and so much more.
She's like a mother to me. I mean, I love her to death. I wash her back, give her baths, her hair, sweep, mop. I cook breakfast. I wash, make her bed, change her bed. Everything.
But the state's financial crisis now threatens the lifeline that Jane and 80,000 other seniors rely on to live independent lives at home. 2 weeks ago, the Department on Aging's community care program ran out of cash, 3.5 months before the end of the fiscal year. This isn't the first time the program's run out of money, but it has never happened this early.
The problem is more dire at this point to the fact that the state is anywhere from, on average, 4 to 6 months behind in paying providers.
The state now owes $173 million to home care companies, $2 million of it to Bethel New Life, the nonprofit agency providing care for Jane McDonald. This financial strain was the last straw.
The program that we're closing is our in-home services program. I think a lot of organizations will end up closing their programs for the same reasons. They cannot cash flow 5 months worth of expenses without any money coming in. For those organizations, that'll be dire. For the seniors, though, you have the state then scrambling, trying to provide them someone else who can care for them. And in some locations, that may not be possible.
A recent survey shows 37% of home care providers in the state of Illinois are just 1 month away from collapse, falling off their own fiscal cliffs if lawmakers fail to approve a supplemental infusion of cash. There are severe consequences for taxpayers and the elderly.
The senior will wind up in a nursing home that's going to cost the state 4 times what it costs with the community care program. They're going to pay for it one way or the other.
The effect of this program really is a lot bigger than people sometimes realize. It would have a whole ripple effect through the economy of these neighborhoods, not only the individual senior who is at risk for safety reasons, but also the whole family that's now going to have to disrupt their education or their employment that is their livelihood.
And as baby boomers age, the need for home care grows. Requests are up 20% statewide for next year. Bethel New Life was able to partner with Chicago Commons, a nonprofit with a larger in-home service program that can afford to wait for the state to pay. In this case, the transition preserves crucial care and hundreds of precious relationships. Jane McDonald and Wycilla Suttle worry about those who are not as fortunate.
The idea of her leaving me, I didn't know what I was going to do.
I dread to even think about it. I know it's there, but like I say, we blessed. Yeah.
Get to stay together.
We get to stay together.
In a written statement, the Illinois Department on Aging said they are doing their best to manage the program under dire financial circumstances and are working with the state legislature to secure supplemental funding to keep those services going. Joining us now to discuss this story is David Vinkler, the Associate State Director of Advocacy and Outreach for AARP Illinois. David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The money for this program, almost $700 million, ran out about 2 weeks ago, and we are more than 3 months before the end of the fiscal year. Talk about what's at stake here, both for the people who work as caregivers and the people who rely on those caregivers.
So basically, the program already is well behind on payments just due to the state's cash flow. This means there's no authority to spend any more money, even if they do send their bills in and the state catches up. So right now, they started the year $173 million behind carrying from the last fiscal year. And then with that, they predicated the budget on cuts that they weren't able to perform to the tune of $145 million, adding up to a $310 million deficit on a program that's, like you said, right around $700 and some million appropriated. So the providers won't have any payment to continue these services for the seniors that need them.
How did we get into this trouble? I mean, how are they allowed to keep bringing these costs forward from year to year?
Well, they started doing it in about 2003, and at that point, they only carried about 1.5 million over, and then it grew at almost an exponential level up until today.
Even if you are a large provider, though, will anyone float you a loan if they know that there's no state money in sight and you're not going to see a payment for at least until July, and then they're 6 months behind on that, right?
Right, and that's the big problem with the appropriation running out. When there is appropriation, they don't spend it, the lenders see that the state intends to spend the money. In this case, there's no guarantee that the state will pay the money, and the lenders will tighten up on the providers.
What is the cost to the state, both personally and fiscally, of this?
Right, so the personal cost is seniors losing services. These are services that they prefer. Most of our members, 80–90%, prefer to stay in the community, would prefer not to go into a nursing home. Now, there's also a fiscal cost to this. The senior population has grown. If you look at the 65 plus population between 2010 and 2000, it's grown by 7%. The 85 plus population has grown by 22%. So you're seeing a lot of very elderly seniors in this system, and that's growing year to year. If we don't sustain these programs, you will see them having to choose nursing home over in-home care. In-home care costs roughly $800 a month. In nursing home care is $3,000 a month. So if we don't deal with this and we don't get these programs robust and able to serve seniors, you will cause the next fiscal crisis for Illinois as more and more seniors get on these need for long-term care.
I mean, in your opinion, can the state afford not to pass the supplemental and keep these programs going?
They can't, and the state can't afford to not have these programs. We're really pushing our members to call their legislators. We even set up an 800 number. It's a hotline so that all they have to do is punch in their zip code and it'll connect them directly to the legislator. The hotline is 1-800-664-9903. We really want seniors to call their legislators, their families to call their legislators to make sure this stays in place. Now, this is not just an interest for seniors. This is an interest for taxpayers. If we do have a system that relies entirely on nursing homes, we're going to be paying 3 times the rate that we would have in the community.
Talk about how we got here. I mean, your organization has been sounding the alarm on this, and so have a number of others. Have lawmakers just not been listening? Are they preoccupied with other things? What's happening here?
Well, you see a lot of pressure to cut. A lot of legislators feel that. The governor feels that. But if we're not looking realistically at these back bills in order to do what's politically expedient and pass a budget that comes under what they perceive as the cap, and they don't think about the long term on this, we're going to create a huge budget problem. So the seniors, if they don't get these services, they won't be able to sustain this.
Now, seniors are a huge voting bloc, but this particular sector of seniors, people who are disabled, don't usually get out to vote. I'm just wondering, do you think that plays a part in all of this?
I think they see the seniors as a big voting bloc, so they are worried about that. These folks have a little more difficulty because they have to meet a standard of disability to be on the program. So they will have a little more difficulty getting out to talk to their legislators. So they really do rely on these providers, their caregivers, to really engage in this process, and their family.
What roadblocks are there now to getting the supplemental bill passed, getting a cash infusion that would keep these services going?
I think that the General Assembly is really struggling with the price tag on the whole bill. Unfortunately, it's kind of like paying your electric bill. If I don't pay it 1 month, it gets bigger the next. The longer you ignore this problem, the larger the problem becomes. So I understand their reluctance to deal with a $300 million hole in the budget, but not dealing with it is what created this problem. We need to start to deal with it.
Now, you have your tentacles out in Springfield, and you speak to a lot of these providers. How long can some of them hold on knowing that there's no payment in sight?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, the size of the provider makes a difference. But the thing that we really struggle with is, as you saw, one provider get to a point where they had to close their doors. Fortunately, they were picked up by another provider. But they really resist talking about their financial struggles just because they want to protect their workers, they want to protect the folks that they serve. So a lot of times they don't go out with a bang, they just go out quietly, and legislators don't see it, and they say, well, we don't see this pain. Well, a lot of times you won't see this. Unfortunately, when it happens, people lose their services that they need, and you create a budget deficit.
How concerned are you with the population of baby boomers that are now aging and may need these services in the future?
Yeah, the baby boomer growth is just hitting us now, and those folks are just over 60. I don't think that we've felt that impact yet. Most of the impact that we felt is at 85 plus population growth, and we're going to continue to feel that. But as those folks that are 65 start reaching that level where they need care, that growth will basically double. And the state has a choice. Do we want to fund this at $3,000 a month, or do we want to fund it at $800 a month? And if we don't sustain it, it's going to be coming out of all of our pockets.
David Vinkler, we thank you for your expertise on this. I know you'll be keeping an eye on this, as will we.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now, there is a hot new trend in farming, and it's probably not what you think. Here's Chris with more.
Barbara, that trend is known as indoor farming. It's catching on in urban areas nationwide, and one of the pioneering indoor farms is right here in the Chicago area.
We could grow in water, we could grow with no chemicals, no pesticides, we could grow with nutrients from fish. Now, can we sell that?
Yolanta Harday is CEO of a company called Farmed Here, the largest organic indoor vertical farm in the country. The concept blossomed in her basement about 3 years ago. She and some friends were experimenting with aquaponics, a system of growing plants with water and fish.
Our first sale was in a Ziploc, regular Ziploc bag, basil and Ziploc bag with just a label. And I went to one of the owners of one of the Chicago stores. So he tasted it, he loved it, he said, bring it on. And that's how the romance with local basil started.
Today, her company's products can be found at Whole Foods, Mariano's, and other retailers. The vertical farm, with racks and racks of green leafy plants, including basil and arugula, occupies a 90,000 square foot concrete building in Bedford Park. It had been sitting empty for 5 years. The operation requires a lot of water and a lot of fish.
Without the fish, would be using, you'd have to use chemical fertilizers. So basically we're using them to fertilize our plants, to naturally fertilize our plants.
Each tank holds 800 to 1,200 tilapia. The waste they produce is filtered and then pumped into a series of growing systems stacked about 3 stories high.
The plants act as additional biofiltration since they're soaking up all that waste, all those nutrients, and basically it goes right back to the tanks and it starts all over again.
There is no dirt on this farm. The plants begin as seedlings in a spongy cork-like plug made from coconut trees, which are then placed in water-filled trays.
We start them at this end. As they get bigger, we push them down, and the heights are a little taller here. So we're moving them as they're growing. If it's grown in the States, it's grown in Hawaii or California, but to grow it in the dead of winter in Chicago is fantastic.
Not only is there no dirt, there's also no sunshine at this indoor farm, just overhead lighting.
That's not sunshine, absolutely. It's fluorescent light. That's the only way we could grow 365 days out of the year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We're not exposed to droughts. We're not exposed to water runoffs. We're not exposed to pollution. We're trying to mimic Mother Nature and provide the best possible environment.
Despite the lack of dirt and sunshine, Harde maintains her plants are still getting all the nutrients they need from the fish. She believes that as more people around the world move to cities, the need for indoor farming will grow dramatically.
We're looking into about 9 billion people in the world by 2050. So we really have to concentrate how we're going to feed those people. How do we provide them with sustainable way of growing?
Looks like a promising way to help cities cope. And while we're talking about solutions to urban problems, we have a mixed message about crime this week. Joining us to talk about that and other trending topics are Ralph Martire, Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, author and historian Leslie Goddard, and Chicago Sun-Times columnist Mary Mitchell. Welcome to everybody.
Thank you.
So we heard this week that Chicago homicides are down in the first 3 months of this year compared to last year, about 40%, especially in February and March, down dramatically. Mary, does the mayor and the police superintendent deserve some credit for this?
Well, I'm going to withhold judgment until we get through April, May, June, warm weather. Because Chicago experienced in February and March.
It was cold.
Very, very cold weather. And everybody knows the criminals don't want to be out in the cold either. So people who are gun-toting, you would expect to see a reduction in crime, and I think we saw that. So I would say I would withhold judgment. But the mayor and the superintendent have to put the better spin on it. You know, they're trying very hard to communicate to the rest of the country that Chicago is not this violent, terrible place and that it's safe to come here. Unfortunately, of course, that message was overshadowed last weekend.
Well, Leslie, is this an encouraging trend, or do you agree with Mary that it's too soon to make a judgment call?
Yeah, I agree. It's too soon. I'm very convinced, and I think, you know, when you look at trends over time, you really have to compare a little bit broader, several years over scope, because patterns of weather can have a huge impact on these kind of statistics. But I also agree, you know, we're encountering a huge negative media attention in the city of Chicago, and anything we can do to kind of counteract that perception is probably a move in the right direction.
Well, Ralph, the news may be encouraging in the short term, but if you go back, I mean, last year, more than 500 homicides in the city.
Yeah, number one, clearly the sample size isn't big enough. I mean, that's very clear, and so you do have to withhold judgment. Number two, of course, a political process. Folks are going to take credit for good news, and that's how it works. And believe me, if things go wrong, even if it's not their fault, we'll blame them. So that's all good. But I think number three, what we haven't done is we haven't dealt with the real long-term issues that result in a lot of violence. I mean, there are no jobs for youth, particularly low-income youth. Our schools really don't have the capacity to engage children in enrichment programs like art, sports, and music, et cetera, that give them something to do other than be on the street. And so unless we start making investments in these bigger programs, particularly in low-income communities, violence will consistently be a problem in the city of Chicago.
Mary, you were just making the point that this news conference from the mayor and the police superintendent was overshadowed by what happened downtown on Saturday, where hundreds of kids came out. Some people were jostled. In fact, there was a cartoon in your paper, the Sun-Times, which called it the Mug Mile. Not good publicity for Chicago.
That's pretty good. You know, one thing about Chicago, and I've lived here all my life, is that we are cooped up all winter. And when the first warm day, you can expect to see some of anything. I never drive on that very first warm day because the drivers are even a little bit crazy. And so you have these kids out on spring break. They use the internet and social media to gather teens who, and you know how teens are. They have all this pent-up energy. If they don't have anything positive to do, what are they going to do? They're going to hit the streets. And now they're hitting the streets on the Mag Mile, where everybody wants to be on a warm day, and causing all kind of trouble. But I think we have to really pay attention to the fact that it wasn't criminal damage to property. It wasn't robberies and assaults. It wasn't any of those type of things.
Well, there was at least one assault, and there was some
But that assault was not committed on, from what I understand, it wasn't committed by the group of teens that were running wild on the Mag Mile. It was committed on a CTA train by another group of young people. So here's my point. The point I'm trying to make is that they're going to have to figure out a way to, one, engage young people to give them other alternatives, and really get down to the root of why coming down to the mag, they're sending a message when they gather in groups like that to come to a place where they're not expected to be seen and act out. That's the problem here, getting a grip on that, not adding more police necessarily, because if it doesn't happen on a mag mile, what about Navy Pier? What about State Street?
Well, Leslie, what about, where are the parents in this? I mean, hundreds of kids got these misdemeanor ticket, and what is the role for the parents if they find out their kids are involved in this?
Well, and it's a great point, and I think it goes back in many ways to what you were talking about that sense of empowerment, because I think there is a big power play. Right. You know, there is a sense of power, and I feel like when people get in groups, and particularly when you're talking about a big group, people do things in groups that they don't do when they're on their own. And that's frightening. Anything that kind of invades your sense of security and safety, and that's, you know, it's no coincidence, I think, that they picked the Magnificent Mile. Right. This is a very high-profile area to make a power play.
Young people from different parts of the city might feel like they're not wanted there.
Yes.
And so they're gonna. What do teens do? They go exactly where they're not wanted. They're rebellious. They're rude. They're disrespectful when most of them when their parents aren't around. So you get back to
but
to
obviously
the question
for
of
people coming in, it's a scary situation to have bands
bands
of kids roaming. And one of the alderman for the district there is proposing more off-duty police officers, Ralph, and he's also proposing that the city not pay for them, that their payment be taken up by either the Merchants Association or philanthropists or others. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think that dog won't hunt. I mean, if you're running a business, you have no extra obligation to pay for the police force to come and maybe protect against a public situation like this. And I think the bigger picture, you have technology available now. So in the old days, if kids were getting ready to act out, maybe 10 of them could get together on a street and create a little ruckus. Well, word of mouth is not nearly as powerful as word of tweet or word of Facebook.
Right.
So these kids can now get together in very large numbers, and the larger the number, the less likelihood you individually get caught.
Right.
So it really encourages a very dangerous situation, and I think the real only way to approach this, you're not going to be able to monitor Facebook, you're not going to be able to monitor Twitter effectively, is to go back to what I said the first time around. Get other ways to engage youth, particularly youth growing up in low-income communities, that's positive, that they enjoy, and gives them something to look forward to so they don't have all this angst and want to go act out.
While we're talking about crime, we have to move on quickly. Here in Cook County, new tax, $25 per gun purchased, started Monday. Is this going to make a difference?
You know, we've been using tax policy to try and impact human actions and human attitudes for a long time. Both carrot and stick ways, I think, of that kind of a thing. Are they effective? Sort of. You know, we certainly have seen a decrease in cigarettes.
Won't people just move to go to another county to buy their guns to avoid that tax?
The criminal that's buying a $50 gun or a $100 gun on the street is going to be affected by this. And even a person who legally wants to buy a gun, they're going to pay the extra $25. Here's what's bad about it to me. It sends the wrong message. It's a moral message that you're sending. You're saying these guns, people are getting shot and getting killed on the streets, and this is a very bad thing. Oh, let's tax it. I just think that's the wrong message to send, and I don't think it's going to have nearly the impact that the Cook County commissioner is saying that it would have.
Ralph, the other big tax news this week is Governor Quinn and Senator Durbin are behind a new internet tax. They say it would be more fair because mom and pop stores here are losing money because people are going into their stores and then looking on the internet, buying stuff on their smartphones, and so the mom and pops lose. What do you think about this new tax?
Well, you know, that's actually true, and so just to even out the playing field with the local retailer and the Amazon.coms of the world, et cetera, it would just make sense. It would not be a burden on these large sellers on the internet. I mean, let's just be honest.
And they're going to exempt the small ones.
They put in a software program. They could account for the sales tax at any state on any product. I mean, that's no problem. I mean, the bigger picture is it's only $200 million in revenue, and $200 million was a lot when I was a kid. But if you look at the scope of the Illinois fiscal problems, we have an $8.9 billion hole in our state fiscal system today. It's 35% of our general fund spending on education, health, human services, and public safety, which is where 9 out of $10 go. So while I'm all for getting that $200 million and leveling the playing field between local retailers that have brick and mortar shops and these internet-based providers, at the end of the day, Illinois needs a little more adult discussion on its tax policy and a more rational, long-term way, structural way to solve its fiscal problems, or all those terrible things we've been talking about in the news, like, for instance, not having the capacity to keep putting money into community care for seniors. Right. It's not going to get better.
So all a question of priorities here. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much, Mary Mitchell, Leslie Goddard, and Ralph Martire. With the 2nd Congressional District election coming up very soon, we found it fitting to look into this question on voting submitted by one curious WBEZ listener.
I'm Jennifer Brandel, and I'm a reporter at WBEZ. And curious citizen Ryan McIntyre says he's suspicious of electronic voting machines. So he asked us this question: what is being done to eliminate electronic voting machines from Chicago? Well, the simple answer to that is they're doing nothing. In fact, Chicago election officials say they plan to use electronic voting machines for the foreseeable future, and that's for a few reasons. For one, election officials say touchscreen machines can better accommodate voters with disabilities. Touchscreens can also present ballots from various precincts in tons of different languages, which ends up saving a lot of paper. And lastly, election officials say they have a lot of safeguards in place to prevent tampering with the machines at every point of the process, and that they've never had reason to believe that there's been any compromise in the machines. So you might wonder, how do these voting machines actually work? First, a precinct judge activates your voting card. Then, you insert the voting card into the Edge 2 Plus voting machine. The electronic ballot appears on the screen. Meanwhile, a printed ballot keeps track of your choices as you make them. Then you finalize and submit your ballot. The other option, of course, is to vote with a paper ballot. Those are inserted by hand and scanned by the Optex scanner. Both scanned paper votes and electronic votes are then retrieved from memory cartridges. They're then each placed into a machine called the hybrid activator, accumulator, and transmitter to tabulate precinct results. Those results are transmitted electronically to a central counting station. And the cartridges eventually make their way to election headquarters via this bag at the end of the day. There have been security concerns raised for every part of this process. At this point, though, the Chicago Board of Elections says it's looking for a new generation of paper ballot scanners and not a new generation of touchscreen voting machines.
To learn more about Curious City, log on to our website, WYCC.org. Vote on the story that most interests you, then tune into In the Loop. We'll put the story with the most votes on the air. Thanks for tuning in this week. You are now in the loop. The discussion continues right now on WYCC.org. Log on and join us. I'm Chris Buick.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Until next time, good night.